Water. Hey, it's Adam, and I'm super excited to bring you this video because in this video, we're going to be talking about developmental psychology and how it's absolutely essential for you to begin to understand if you want to understand the world and how it works. Now, I genuinely believe that this video here is psychoactive, literally meaning that if you follow along with me and are interested in what I'm saying, then the structure of your consciousness is going to begin to change. You're going to have much deeper understanding of yourself, much deeper understanding of other people, and thereby have a deeper understanding of all of reality. Because developmental psychology is a very key puzzle piece for you to understand if you want to build yourself an accurate model of reality. It's very, very difficult for anyone to really know what the hell is going on here in this lifetime unless they have a really good understanding of developmental psychology. Now, it's too bad that these models aren't being talked about in schools, and I think the reason for that is that our school system really doesn't give a shit about you understanding the world. Really, what they care more about is grooming you to become a really, really good factory worker. So, luckily, this guy on the internet, Adam Miceli, really cares about your understanding of the world and my own personal understanding of the world. And that's why I'm so excited to present to you these very deep quotes, models, and insights that I'm going to get into right now. So I have some really cool quotes from Ken Wilber that's just going to introduce the importance of what we're talking about here. Now, this isn't just a simple concept which you can learn or not learn as you wish, or a mere theory which you can take or leave, like for example Jacques Derrida's deconstruction. But rather it is an inherent, universally present stage of human development, like Maslow's stages of safety, belongingness, and self-esteem. So what I'm going to be talking about here isn't just some theory or philosophy, it's actually the actual structure stages that human beings go through as we develop and understand the world. As our consciousness develops, we go through these predictable sets of stages. Just like an acorn goes through several universal stages on its way to becoming an oak tree, and an egg goes through several universal stages on its way to becoming a chicken, so a human being goes through several universal stages on its way to maturity. Now this is so cool. And also, quote, "These are not vague, fantasized, oddball, or goofy beliefs, but evidence-drenched, data-loaded, communally verified, profoundly important ideas, elements, and factors. And the only odd thing about any of them is how relatively unknown they remain." These are all quotes from Ken Wilber's book, The Religion of Tomorrow, which is probably the most profound book ever written thus far in human history. Ken Wilber's a serious genius, a visionary sage. Now, these models, I'm going to get into them right now. I'm still introducing them right now with these really cool quotes. Now, I have another quote right here. "The point of creating a map or framework of these different levels is not to pigeonhole, judge, label, or develop prejudice about people. The point is to help us understand and communicate better with people who are using different worldviews. As individuals grow and develop through the entire spiral or spectrum of stages, and thus help increase our understanding, care, and compassion, and also our capacity to communicate with people who are at stages different than the ones that we might be ourselves. So if you want to become a leader, if you want to lead people, if you want to understand people and be more compassionate with people, then you're going to have to understand how the human mind functions and also how the human mind evolves through different sets of value systems, belief systems, and worldviews. And that's exactly what I'm going to be presenting to you today. Now, these models, quote, also help each of us get a sense of just how much further we ourselves can grow and evolve if we choose to do so. And in fact, research shows that simply studying any developmental model accelerates that person's growth through the various structure stages of development. Learning those models is psychoactive. It has a direct and powerful capacity to activate and accelerate one's own growth and development through these areas. Now, that's why I say this video is psychoactive. Now, I can definitely attest to what Ken Wilber is saying here, because as I've spent the last 2 years or so really deeply diving into many of these different developmental psychology models, I have felt myself getting a bird's eye view of the entire world, and the actual structure of my consciousness is changing. I'm able to quickly understand some worldly problems. I'm able to quickly understand interpersonal problems that I would have been completely blind to before. So these models are a really useful framework for you to understand the world. Now, the first model I'm going to be introducing is Susanne Cook-Greuter's ego development theory model. And the purpose of this video here is to speak about the structure of wisdom. What does it mean for a human being to be wise? What actual values are they using in order to be a wise human being? So let's look at Cook-Greuter's ego development theory. I'm going to have a couple quotes here to just introduce the model, and then I'm going to be talking about some very profound insights about it. So, quote, development theory describes the unfolding of human potential towards deeper understanding, wisdom, and effectiveness in the world. Now, each later stage includes and transcends the previous ones. That is, the earlier perspectives remain part of our current experience and knowledge. Just as when a child learns to run, they don't forget how to walk. Each later stage in the sequence is more differentiated, integrated, flexible, and capable of optimally functioning in a rapidly changing and ever more complex world. So basically, each of these stages of human development, such as spiral dynamics, they are moving towards deeper complexity, towards greater circles of inclusion, and towards greater understanding of the world. Each new stage is incorporating and including every previous stage. So the later stages have a very easy time understanding the previous stages, but the earlier stages cannot understand the later stages. Quote here, the people's stages of development influences what they notice and can become aware of, and therefore what they can describe, articulate, cultivate, influence, and change. So the purpose of life here, one of the ways you can frame it, is that your job is to, first of all, understand that these stages of development exist, what they mean, how they work, And then is to go through and develop yourself upwards through these stages of psychological development. Because as we move higher, we're having much more complexity in the way that we see the world, and that means that we are going to understand the world in a more truthful way. We're going to understand what the world actually is. And that overall is going to lead towards having more wisdom and more fulfillment in life. Okay, so as healthy development unfolds, freedom, tolerance for difference and ambiguity, as well as flexibility, self-awareness, and skill in interacting with the environment increase, while defenses against the environment decrease. Now, right now I'm going to put on the screen the first model that we're going to be looking at. This is an arc that on it has each stage of the Cook-Greuter ego development theory. Now, it's not super important right now that you understand the details of each stage, because this video is going to be talking about a lot of the trends of going from the lower stages to the later stages. So if you study spiral dynamics, I'm actually going to be putting up the spiral dynamics summary right here on the video screen. These value systems are pretty important for you to understand, because spiral dynamics is but one developmental psychology model. So most of society is at stage orange. Most of Western society is at stage orange. Most of developing society is around stage red and blue. And most of the more psychologically developed people in Western society are around stage green, and there's a very, very small percentage of people at stage yellow. Now, this video here is actually going to be helping you move into stage yellow, which is extremely important for our society as a whole, because stage yellow is the first stage that begins to really get a very deep understanding of the world and how it works. And with this understanding is able to make lasting and meaningful change in the world, which is exactly what we need. So let's move into the that arc, the arch of increasing differentiation and integration. Now, I'm going to explain what all of this means right now. So as we see that arch, what that is that shows the human mind, that represents the human consciousness. And then along the arch, there's each stage that has its own set of values and beliefs and worldviews. Now, at the beginning of the arch, we start as basically a baby. We start as a very limited consciousness that has very little self-awareness, very little self-awareness. In fact, the self and the world is barely different. So you can think of this as like a newborn baby or as a very young child who doesn't quite understand the difference between themselves and the world. They don't quite understand their place in the world, and they don't really know who they are as a person. They don't have a lot of separation between themselves and the world. They're unconsciously integrated with their environment. So this could even be seen as like a dog or a very rudimentary, basic level of survival. Now, as we move along the arc, what's happening is we're developing the ego structure, what you think you are, your separation from the world. As we move through the arc, we're actually developing our ego structure, meaning that we're developing how we see the world, who we are in the world, and our ability to observe the world as a subject. So right at the top of the arc, you'll see that there's a line that splits the arc into a left half and a right half. Now this line right here shows the peak of differentiation between subject and object. And that is actually where most of modern society is at right now in terms of their psychological development. Most of modern society is around the achiever or number 4 level of psychological development. So I'm going to throw in a quote right now. I'm going to read what Cook-Greuter has to say about this maximal separation between subject and object, the height of the ego structure. By most modern expectations, fully functional adults see and treat reality as something pre-existent and external to themselves, made up of permanent, well-defined objects that can be analyzed, investigated, and controlled for our benefit. This view is based on a maximal separation between subject and object, thinker and thought. It epitomizes the traditional scientific frame of mind that is concerned with measurement, prediction, and control. It also represents the goal of much of Western socialization and schooling. Most adults, including many developmentalists who are not concerned with the basic arbitrariness of defining the objects, are not concerned with the basic arbitrariness of defining the objects. They're quite unaware that, according to Koplowitz, the process of naming or measuring pulls that which is named out of reality, which itself is not nameable or measurable. They assume that subject and object are distinct, and that by analyzing the parts, one can figure out the whole. Now, there's a lot to unpack there. That's an extremely deep insight, which explains the entire paradigm of Western society. Now, right now, if you look back at the arc, our Western society is at the max, the peak of subject-object differentiation, meaning that I am a self, a separate self that is totally disconnected from the world. Meaning that my existence is purely mechanical, physical, biological, materialistic, and I am literally just a body that randomly happened as a result of evolution. And I literally just exist in a physical 3-dimensional universe, and how I think about the world doesn't affect what the world actually is. Now that's a very big one. Most people you talk to don't realize the connection between their thoughts about the world and the actual world. They think these are two separate things. They believe that they have a physical object, like a book. This is a physical, separate object, a tangible object that we can measure with our instruments. We can dissect it and see what it's made of. And regardless of what I think about this book, doesn't change what this book actually is in truth, in fact. Now, this isn't true, basically. The mind plays a key role in the actual construction of reality. Reality does not exist unless the mind is there, creating and constructing meanings, ideas, and concepts. But this maximal this stage, this is stage orange, basically. In spiral dynamics, this is stage orange. Rationalistic, scientific, materialistic, logical, achievement-oriented. They really only care about maximizing their profit, maximizing their material wealth in the world. This is because this actual stage of psychological development doesn't yet realize the importance of mind in the process of meaning making. They haven't yet realized the importance and significance of their thoughts in the process of understanding what the world is. This maximal stage, this stage orange, thinks that if we want to understand what reality is, then what we have to do is we got to get microscopes, we got to get telescopes, and we got to do scientific double-blind studies. We got to look and observe at the object, and we got to break it apart into smaller little pieces, and then we'll start to understand what reality is. Now, as we move past this arc, past this line, this maximal separation, now we're moving into deconstruction of the ego self, deconstruction of the world, and deconstruction of beliefs. So this arc is showing you from the beginning, you are basically unified with the world. You have barely any separation between you and the world. Then the ego starts to develop, you start to understand the world more and more, and this is the process of acquiring knowledge. So we notice more pieces of the puzzle, we discover patterns, rules, and laws. We're able to predict, measure, and explain the world. We can see further ahead and back in time as this ego structure is developing. We're able to know more and do more, and we gain more information and skills. Now, once we reach this peak, now we're actually, the arc starts going back down, and we're actually deconstructing the ego. Now we're beginning to deconstruct our beliefs. We're able to understand the world more deeply, and this is now the process of becoming wise and gaining wisdom. Gaining knowledge is about building up a mental conceptual model of the world, but gaining wisdom is actually about deconstructing models of the world. Emptying your cup, not filling your cup, emptying your cup is what wisdom is. Now, as we start to deconstruct the world, this is moving up into stage green, yellow, and turquoise on spiral dynamics. We're beginning to understand the world more deeply. We're beginning to recognize assumptions, to see the whole dynamic system. We're able to strip away illusions. We're able to sit in empty mind. And we're able to transform ourselves. Now, this is so cool. So as we're deconstructing the ego self, we move through individualist, strategist, magician, and then we end back at unitive, where there is no longer a separation between subject and object. That separation has been consciously deconstructed. And this forms a beautiful circle. So we come from oneness, we come from no separation between subject and object. That's where we start in life. We divide ourselves from reality. We separate ourselves. We create a separate ego self, which we try and use to measure and break apart, quote unquote, reality. Then we start to realize that there is no difference between subject and object. So that means my experience of reality is central to what reality actually is. The way I experience reality is central to what reality actually is. What I think reality is what it becomes. There is no such thing as an objective fact. There are only perspectives and interpretations. However, what I just said is, quote unquote, an objective fact. But that's a very technical point that I don't want to explain. So we're dividing ourselves from the world, and then we're moving back towards unity. So notice how this line that splits it right in the middle, this is the separation and describes the distinction between tier 1 thinking and tier 2 thinking. So spiral dynamics talks about tier 1 thinking, and what tier 1 is all about is building a model of the world and defending it like an ideology, defending a dogma, defending your worldview. Everyone else's worldview is wrong. But this worldview that I have, my worldview, my pet ideology, my pet theory, that is the only correct way to see the world. That's tier 1. That's how tier 1 thinks. And that creates so many arguments, creates wars, creates political gridlock, and overall segregation, because that's all tier 1 is about, is separating themselves from the whole, because that's what the ego wants to do, wants to divide itself from the unity. Now, after we move past tier 1, we move into tier 2, which is a radical quantum leap in meaning, which I talk a lot about in my video Meta Thinking for some more detail. But that's what this whole channel is about, really, is we've exhausted tier 1 thinking. Now it's time to move into tier 2 thinking, which is about deconstructing currently held belief systems. It's not about defending my belief system, but it's about seeing similarities between all of the belief systems. So I'm not just defending my one religion, but I'm actually studying all the religions and I'm putting them together. I'm taking the similarities from them and I'm using that to build a more accurate worldview that's built on the realization of absolute relativism. And then eventually, we're seeking towards spiritual enlightenment, which is the eventual merging of the separate ego self into the oneness of reality. Now, again, this is why I believe that if your model of the world does not include spirituality and you don't have a good conceptual idea of what awakening is, if you don't understand what awakening is, what non-duality is, which is literally oneness, if you don't understand what that means, then you're not going to understand the world. You're going to have a very partial, very, very rudimentary and beginning you basically have a preschooler's understanding of the world. You don't know what the hell is going on in life unless you understand what awakening is on a deep level. Not just, oh, awakening, yeah, you just kind of understand what it is. Like I just, I have my crystals and awakening, spiritual awakening just means experiencing more love in my life. Not like that. It's like actually having a very deep understanding of what awakening is, what oneness is, realizing that reality is only your mind, created by you as God, as infinite oneness, and you're just imagining that you're a separate self. That's how reality is created, through division and unity. Now this line here in the middle of the arc, this represents the shift from needy perception to being perception, which I talked a lot in my video Meta Thinking. But basically, All on the left side is all about serving the ego. That's what it's all about, serving the ego. Now on the right side of the line, we're actually more about deconstructing the ego and serving, quote unquote, the spirit. Now that does not mean that people who have passed the orange stage of development, every single human being that you've met likely has an ego structure. But as we move past this line and we start to go towards the downward side of the arc, then our ego structure is becoming more and more healthy, in the sense that it's starting to realize that it's a fiction. It's becoming more and more deconstructed. And then what's left is just spirit, pure being. So we're moving from constructing worldviews to deconstructing worldviews. We're moving from understanding reality on the level of content to understanding reality on the level of structure. Now that's so important. Notice how in this video, I'm not asking you to believe in any type of belief system. I'm not asking you to believe in any type of content. I'm sharing with you the structure of reality, which can be seen by you if you actually do the work for yourself and introspect. So the difference between content and structure is like the difference between like the content of a sentence and the actual structure of grammar. So for example, the dog went for a walk. That's an example of content. But then actually going into that sentence and seeing what the sentence is made of. Like, oh, it's made of a subject. We have the dog. Then we have a verb, like the went for a walk. We have the object, which is went or walk or whatever. So those are the rules of grammar. So and the rules of grammar can't really be disputed. That's just the rules. That's how the grammar works. That's how it's structured. And what we're pointing to here is the structure of the mind. We're pointing to the structure of the mind, not the content of the mind. I'm not telling you which belief system is better. I'm not saying Christianity is better than science. I'm not saying that this way of seeing the world is better than that way of seeing the world. I'm saying that the change from content to structure, how does the mind work? What is the ego? How does knowledge work? How does understanding work? This is what the second tier is more interested in. Now, the first tier is interested in making distinctions, dividing up reality, which is useful for analyzing things. It's useful for making technologies, making distinctions. This thing here is good. This thing here is bad. Right? We're making finer and finer distinctions. But what the second tier is interested in doing is making broader and broader connections. So tier 1 is interested in dividing reality up in smaller and smaller parts, which eventually peaks in science, which is what we have right now. But then as we move past science and we move into the post-rational stages, the post-conventional stages, now we're interested in making broader and broader connections. It's a big insight right there. This is the difference between analysis versus synthesis. Now, if you want to understand reality as a whole, you're going to have to become really, really good at synthesizing different perspectives, different worldviews. Science thinks that we can understand reality by breaking it apart more and more and more and more and more, but that's not how it works. You understand reality by putting the pieces together more and more and more and more. So notice how the first tier is paying attention to the physical world. This is what the first tier is interested in. The external world, the actual content of experience. The second tier is interested in the structure of experience itself, the structure of mind, the structure of reality. So the first tier is caught up in the actual storyline of the movie. They're interested in what the characters have to say. The second tier is actually looking at how the movie was made. How does the projector work? How does the light hit the screen? Why is the movie the way that it is? Big insights here. The first tier is paying attention to, quote unquote, the facts. The second tier is paying attention to how the facts are mentally constructed. What is a fact? What is that? So we're going meta. You see how we're going meta? This is what wisdom is. We're understanding reality at the structural level, not at the level of content. Knowledge isn't about knowing a bunch of things. It's not about memorizing a bunch of facts. That's what knowledge is about. But knowledge isn't wisdom. Wisdom is about understanding the structure of facts. This is rare, very rare. 1% of the world has this ability. And that's the point of this channel and the point of this video here. See, notice how if you actually stuck with me to this point in the video, notice how the models are psychoactive. It's actually changing the way that you see the world. Next, this line, this distinction between tier 1 and 2 is shifting from knowing to not knowing. Oh, a big one. This is a fat one. The first tier is only interested in knowing things. I know things. The second tier is interested in not knowing as many things as possible. This is huge. The first tier is interested in knowing as many things as possible, into building a conceptual worldview. The second tier is interested in deconstructing their worldview, is interested in not knowing as many things as possible. How much do you not know? That's what wisdom is. This leads to open-mindedness, and this leads to the ability to genuinely study and take seriously a wide variety of perspectives. I'm going to make a lot of videos about that insight in particular. And again, notice how we start as a baby, merged into the one. We separate ourselves from the world. We're separate from the one. We create two, and then we move back and merge again with the one, back into unity. Very, very profound here. So basically, if you want to understand what wisdom is, the wise person is moving towards deconstruction of the self to eventually merge back with the ground of being, or the one, or God, whatever you want to call it. That's what the wise person is up to. That's what they're doing. Okay. Now, as we develop more and more, I'm actually going to put up a different model now. This is the alternating stages of differentiation and integration. And this is just a different view, a different perspective of what I'm talking about here. Let's look at what this means. So right in the middle, around stage 4 and 5, we have the maximal subject-object differentiation. Now after that stage, now we're moving into increasing integration, self-actualization, and we're stepwise, we're slowly deconstructing the illusion of the separate self back into conscious union with the ground of being. Now, 95% of people you talk to, they're still at 3/4 and stage 4. Few people are around stage 4/5. 4 represents spiral dynamic stage orange. 4/5 is green, 5 is yellow, and so on. So why is this so important to study? I'm sure you already intuitively know, but let's articulate it a little bit better. First, we realize that perspective is everything. Perspective is everything. Perspective is everything. Literally means everything that exists is made up of perspectives. So what's so funny about people who like to criticize my teachings, or like to criticize mysticism or spirituality as a whole, they like to say that it's not scientific enough. It's not factual. Adam, you're saying reality is one giant mind? Well, where's the proof? Where are the facts? Where is the scientific study that proves that? But they're not conscious enough to realize that the structure of your consciousness, asking me for facts, asking me for proof, asking me for tangible evidence, you're assuming that reality is physical. And you're assuming that there was a physical reality that existed ever in the first place. You're assuming that the subject, you, is actually distinct from the object. You're assuming that it's possible to find the one canonical way that reality is, like by doing the scientific studies, finding the facts. But it's sad because I'm like way beyond that, and I realize that there is no such thing as a fact. The way a fact works is that you as a self, you as consciousness, are calling it a fact. You're giving this piece of content more authority in describing what reality is than this other piece of content. So if I come to you with some spiritual explanation of the world, which is a way more accurate explanation than any scientific model will even get close to, you'll say, but Adam, that's not factual. Where's the evidence, right? And you're giving this one thing that you call facts, you're giving that priority over this other thing that you call not facts or pseudoscience. But notice that your mind is doing that. Your mind is making the distinction. Your mind creates all of reality. The distinction between me, the self, and other, it's all in the mind. Every distinction that has ever been made is in the mind. Every duality. The difference between up and down is not a scientific difference. There's no difference between up and down. If you go out into space, you realize that it's relative. And also everything is relative. So by understanding, notice now that by understanding psychological mechanisms like the one I'm talking about here, like I'm talking about developmental psychology, by understanding developmental psychology, you're actually understanding the structure of reality. Because at the start of this video, you thought that developmental psychology is just a part of reality, or it's just psychology, it's just about the mind, and then the mind is separate from the world. So my mindset about how the world works has nothing to do with some scientific study about atoms and neutrons and all that stuff. That's just a different area. That's physics. But we realize now that the whole world exists in the mind, in your one mind. And by understanding the structure of consciousness, by understanding the structure of mind, you're actually understanding the substance of reality. That's why developmental psychology is so important and so profound. Now, the reason why any of this is important is because the actual models themselves are psychoactive. They can change the structure of your consciousness, and that's exactly what we need. This is the awakening process, the spiritual awakening process. If you're into spirituality at all and you watch the spiritual YouTubers, they're all like, oh, we're moving into the new earth, the new awakening. Yeah, sure, but do you realize yet that reality is a conceptual construct, that you made it up? There is no earth. There is no new. The distinction between old and new, invented, you made that up. The distinction between earth and not earth, that's invented. The idea of moving into a new earth, yeah, sure. That's exactly what we're doing. But if you want to actually move people into higher states of consciousness, you have to literally teach them how the states of consciousness work, which is what I'm doing right here. Stages of consciousness, not states of consciousness, stages. So we realize that problems cannot be solved from the same level of consciousness that created them. So we're facing a lot of issues, right? We got this coronavirus pandemic. That's one minor issue, but even the bigger issue is that we are polluting the hell out of the world. We are fighting wars. There's poverty. There's no reason why there should be poverty or world hunger. The reason why is because we don't yet understand. We're not at the level of consciousness yet that is even able to solve world hunger. Because in order to make any lasting change to any system that involves a big group of human beings, like a whole country, if you want to make an effective change in a large group of human beings, you have to first understand each part of that group, each stage of development, each stage of psychological development that each group, each community is at. So if you take the whole country of Canada, let's say, right? We have people in Canada that are at spiral dynamic stage red. We have people at stage blue, at stage orange, at stage green, at stage yellow. And all of these people want different things. All of them think the world should be a certain way. And what stage yellow is trying to do, what I'm trying to move you towards, is trying to integrate and include all of the lower stages. Because as we first get into spirituality, as we move from orange to green, we start to think that we're better than everyone else. And we start to think that everyone should be into spirituality. And we start to think that all the lower stages are just unconscious muggles. And they are the reason why reality is the way it is. They are the cause of all of our problems. But yellow starts to realize that no one perspective is better than another. All reality is just a group of different perspectives, and all yellow wants to do is just understand how the mind creates reality. How. And that's super interesting, and what I'm interested in. I've been rambling for a while. Maybe my camera shut off at this point. I have no clue. But if you like this video, then I got way more videos like this. I'm improving my ability to explain these insights. There's all the links to all of the quotes and resources for you. You can study spiral dynamics, which I would highly recommend. I'm going to leave those links in the description. You can study, I got a free PDF for the ego development theory, which is that arc. You can check out Ken Wilber, who is a real genius when it comes to this topic we're talking about right here. Stick with me, subscribe, leave me a like, comment what you liked, what you didn't like, questions, concerns, misunderstandings, leave them all in the comments. I love answering them. And if you have any video recommendations, stuff like that. And I'll see you in the next video.